right. Hello, everyone. Come on in. We are live here with All Things Odd, and I'm Dr. Natalie Phillips. And this is not Dr. Hannah Galloway. She's actually out sick today. But I'm going to have Trista just introduce herself because she's here with us on the show today. So, Trista, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trista. I am a fourth-year audiology student. I will graduate in May. Yay!
Yay.
So I've been working with Dr. Phillips today, just doing my last few bits for my externship and for my degree. And so I'm very excited to be on here and kind of share what we're going to go and talk about today.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So you're in for a treat today with us because we are actually going to have a really, really special guest today. And without further ado, I'm going to bring him on and just switch a few things around. So I'm super excited. So welcome, Matt Hay. So hopefully you guys have known about Matt Hay. Met him. You've seen him around now that we've had conferences where we're in person again. Matt is there because of a special reason. And we're going to get to that. But before we get to that, Matt is super special because he does have a hearing loss. He's a hearing loss advocate. And he's also a keynote speaker. And then he's also founder. If you guys were able to watch our little video that we did of the Redux system, he's actually founder of the Redux drying system too. So yeah, super exciting. And actually, we're going to get him started in talking about that. But before we do, what we're going to do is just talk a little bit more, Matt, about just who you are and tell us a little bit more about your story with hearing loss. Let's start there first.
Sure. All right. That's a loaded question. But first, it's kind of surreal for me to hear you say you're honored to have me here because I've watched what you guys have been doing. And there was no time where there was ever a thought to say, I wouldn't love to do this or be here. So it's a little bit funny to me to think that you would feel that way, but I appreciate it. And also, congratulations. I know that you have new practice and that you guys are growing. And I think through my years of hearing loss, you start to look at things through just the lens of a patient. Now, in my time with Redux, we start to look at it from a professional standpoint. And I have a whole lot of admiration for you guys and the work that it takes to start a new business, finish up your doctorate degree. And in the meantime, student loans and mortgages and rent. And there's just a lot that goes into building a business like that. And I have a lot of respect for you and your colleagues that do that. Because I don't think as a patient, we always see that. We just think my battery power isn't enough. we don't think about all the million other things that you have going on other than being concerned about my battery power. So I guess that's my way of saying thank you. But to answer your question in short, I'm bilaterally deaf now. And I hear with an Auditory Brainstem implant. And you guys are seeing my brand new Nucleus 7, which has USB charging, which is amazing. I can stream music from my iPhone to my implant. And if you're not familiar with an AVI, I have a 12 electrodes sewn directly to my brainstem. And so when I stream music from my phone, I am quite literally Bluetoothing music to my brain. There's no part of my ears that operate. It is directly to my brainstem, which is very kind of cyborgy. And it's amazing. I did not turn off my Bluetooth after getting this mapped 2 weeks ago here in Indianapolis. And on the drive home, it was inadvertently Bluetoothing directions on the map from the hospital back to my house. And so I had Siri talking directly to my brain. So that's all very new. But yeah, I have bilateral acoustic neuromas. And so from about my sophomore year of high school until my mid-20s, I slowly lost my hearing until I eventually lost it all, which really set my whole life on a path that I did not anticipate and eventually led to where I am now.
Wow. Okay. And how long? So when did you get your auditory brainstem implant?
So I was a student at Indiana University in the late 90s when I started to lose my hearing. and I went in and this is a stretch. I credit my audiologist for saying, I went to see an audiologist and she said, your hearing loss, what I'm seeing from the test is not what I expect. I really think you need an MRI. And the MRI is what showed the tumors. So before I ever knew I would be in this position, my audiologist, it's not a stretch to say, really impacted my long-term health, because who knows how large those tumors would have gotten before we found them and treated them, had my audiologist not said, I think you need to talk to somebody. So over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, my hearing declined to a point where we started preparing for that. We started interviewing and talking to hospitals across the globe about who had the most ABI experience. And we ended up going to the House Ear Institute in LA because they had done more than anyone, which was like 50 of them at the time. I mean, it had only been approved by the FDA for about a year. So we went to LA and had that implanted in 2002. And 2004. So I'm on year 17 of my implant now. And the expectation of an ABI, because you really bypass all of the natural hearing, millions of years of evolution went to help us hear a certain way. And the ABI says, yeah, we're going to skip all of that. And they did a great job of managing my expectations and saying it might not work. There's as much art and science here, or as much art as science. And if it does work, you might hear life sounds, car sirens and oven timers. But at that point, I had been totally deaf for about 6 months. And so the idea of police sirens and oven timers sounded magical. And when they turned it on, about 6 weeks later after the implant, they turned it on, and my whole world sounded like wadding up aluminum foil or gravel trucks passing by. And I was very disappointed. It was very discouraging. And even though they had managed those expectations, and I think anybody that gets fitted with a new hearing aid goes through this, if you try to manage your expectations, but it's never good enough, because we always want more, and it's so hard to replicate the magic of hearing. And what our bodies do naturally is so awesome in the true sense of the word, of like awe-inspiring, that to expect a machine with a rechargeable battery to do the same thing is asking a lot. So I spent really the last 17 years relearning to hear, and I can go through that journey. There's been a lot of ups and downs in that to get me where I am today.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this as well, because it's interesting, people that are watching you sit on camera and speak, right? And follow the conversation. Yes, you can probably see our lips reading, right? But that's not the only aid that you're using. Let's talk about, before we get to what you're using to be able to understand us and say hi to our friend Becky as well. There are different things that you're using to help you. Number one, you have great speech, right? But because of what your hearing loss being what we call postlingual, right? You've already experienced speech. You're able to get speech back a little bit faster, right? But talk to people about what you heard before your auditory implant, just to kind of get them to understand, people that are watching that are not audiologists, like what you heard. How much did you hear? Or in other words, maybe how much did you not hear? And then after the auditory brainstem implant, then, talk to us a little bit more. Like you said, it was like foil crinkling, right? But maybe before, because as people are watching you, you do amazing, Matt. So you're able to follow us. So talk to us about maybe the kinds of things you didn't hear and what you were missing out before you got the implant, just to give people an idea, because you do very, very well.
Well, and thank you. And my hearing loss from the very beginning was pretty traditional, aside from the fact that it was happening at 18 instead of the misconception that hearing loss doesn't start until you're 60. There's a whole range there. It just happened for me on the early side of the range. But you initially start losing the S's and T's, or people walk into a room and by the time they get your attention, you realize they have maybe been speaking to you sooner. So those signs were there. And when I first got it fitted with my in the canal aid when I was in college, and you immediately just start picking up volume, and those S's and T's come back, and you get a little bit more clarity. As my hearing aids got bigger, it got harder and harder for amplification to replace what I was missing. But that's because my hearing loss became very, very significant. So fast forward now, the technology at the time just wasn't there to give me what I needed. I mean, all hearing aids, it was kind of like you can get it in any color you want as long as it's tan. It just felt very archaic. And the advancements, not just in hearing aid technology, which is extraordinary, but the advancements that have been made culturally and in society and with technology are pretty remarkable. Closed caption didn't exist on very many. This was just 17 years ago. Closed captioning, I would have to pick and choose what shows I watched based on what was captioned. It was poor. It was slow. Skype came around. But I mean, how long was Skype here? Nothing against the Skype people. But it seems like they were on the 2-yard line of doing this great thing forever. And then maybe the biggest plus, I don't know, biggest, maybe the only plus that really out of the pandemic was all of a sudden Zoom and Teams and Google really upped their video conferencing game. I used to fear phone calls. I mean, I would get so much anxiety about a simple phone call. Even talking to my mom would be a source of anxiety for me. Now the fact that, I can have a live feed conference call with people in Colorado, see multiple people speaking. It's perfectly clear. You guys sound great. And then I actually have 2 windows open right now. One is you guys, and then the other, I use Otter voice recognition software, OTTER. And it's not even a human being that is relaying this. It's artificially intelligent real-time captioning. And it's 90% accurate. I can look, and the fact that it's typing what I'm saying right now in real time is remarkable. So this is just technology that didn't exist only a couple of years ago. And now I use it all day, every day to make my life better.
I love that. Yeah. And, Otter I don't know if it's Otter AI, but we use it when we host a room on Clubhouse. And so a friend of ours, Dr. Angela Alexander, when we host a room on Clubhouse in the Talk Nerdy to Me group, we have Otter AI running in the background. So they now have captions for people who are hard of hearing that can follow along on the Clubhouse app, which is an audio only app. But in addition to that, Angela sets up Otter to do the captioning. So people that click a link that we can post at the top of the room can follow the room in real time as well with that captioning service. So it's incredible and amazing. And I love that you're using it too, and that we're able to talk about it as well for people who might not have heard about it. So I know Trista had a great question. So we'll kind of start off with some questions to kind of guide us along today. But Trista, what is one of your questions that you had for Matt?
Well, I just wanted to see if you thought that there was something that you think would be beneficial for audiologists to know about your type of hearing loss, or just in general, any recommendations that you would give to audiologists. I think for me, it's especially important just because I'm beginning this process of being an audiologist. I am out there still learning, and I will continue to learn throughout everything. So what would just be a couple things that you would recommend?
That's a great question. And first, kudos for remembering to take off mute. 2 years into this, I still forget to take myself off mute. So well done. I have actually given this question, maybe not phrased that way, but given something like that a lot of thought over the last couple of months, because there are, I don't know if it's pet peeve isn't the right phrase. But we hear a lot about best practices, right? I mean, within any field, but we're all focused on audiology, and you hear a lot about best practices. But the more I find of how those best practices are defined, it's usually a bunch of people with great hearing in a room deciding what is best for somebody that can't hear. And their intentions are absolutely good and pure, and they really are committed to helping people hear better. But I think sometimes there's a disconnect of how do you define best for a patient? And so specifically, people use the phrase a lot. I'm thinking about this because I want to make sure I say it right. There's a lot of thought of, or almost a cliche of the stigma of hearing aids. I'm not sure that exists anymore. I know if you walk on a plane, half the people have things in their ears. I don't know that the stigma of having an ear-worn device exists anymore. If it does, it is certainly significantly less than when Ronald Reagan got fitted, at Starkey. I think more than that is there's a fear of going in to get your hearing aid, because I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody else, but I live my life trying to avoid failure or doing things that I know that I'm not going to be good at. It's just sort of a natural instinct. For somebody at 18, 38, or 68 to walk into an audiology office, no matter how lovely your waiting room is, and no matter how great you are with your patient, you're going to tell them what they don't do well. They're going to take a test and fail. They're going to take a test and have anxiety about not hearing the right beeps or not being able to understand what's being said. And I think that if a hearing care professional or the spouse of someone with hearing loss can prepare somebody that's going in to say, this isn't a failure, the success thing. We're just going to help you. Just like having a broken bone doesn't mean your skeletal system failed you. You have a health issue, and these professionals have put a lot of time and energy into helping you function better and to improve your health. It just happens to be your ear. And I think rephrasing or repositioning going into an audiology office as something that's not fearful, and that you're not here to fail something, I think that could really help the people with maybe mild or moderate hearing loss who have been avoiding coming to see you, and then they wait until 10 years later and they're in a bad situation. So I think if the industry focused more on how can we make your life easier or better, and take away the idea of hearing tests. I cringe a little bit when I hear the phrase hearing test, because I know I'm going to fail that. And I don't like to do things that I fail at. So each time you have a door, there's probably a little bell that goes off, and a patient care coordinator or somebody is alerted that somebody walks in your office, recognizing that patient, that me or my dad or somebody else probably had to overcome a significant amount of fear just to step into your office. I think recognizing that and appreciating that is a great way to improve your very initial interaction with someone.
That is so good. Great perspective. I've got a teacher who comes in and does cochlear implant speech perception testing. And every time she comes in, she gets so nervous. She does really well, but because she's a teacher, I think she's in that test mode too. And it's a test, she wants to score good and she wants to get a good score or whatever it is. And I totally hear what you're saying. So that's some great perspective. And thank you for sharing it with our audiology community, especially because there's a lot of audiologists that tune in to this show as well. So I think that was great. Yeah, that was a good question, Trista. Okay. So, going along with just going back to your journey, you've, how did your family help you support you through this journey? And have you also been able to connect to other people by having this type of hearing loss and what you do?
So I'm very fortunate that when I started to when my hearing loss became significant, I was in a relatively serious relationship with now my wife of 19 years. I had a family structure and friend support around me. Despite all of that, it's still a very lonely feeling because you're disconnected a little bit from your world. And at least for me, I didn't know anybody else. I'm in my early 20s living in Chicago with college roommates. There's nobody that can really get what you're going through. So I would encourage, I also didn't have social media or anything like that. So I would encourage people that if you do have that support structure, to lean on them and just be very open about what you're missing, because they probably know what you're missing way more than you do. It's a weird thing about hearing loss is you don't know what you don't know. I don't know when I don't hear something because I didn't hear it. And that's a difficult, it seems like common sense, but it's a difficult concept for people to get day in and day out. So being open with the people around you about what you heard or didn't hear is helps to keep you engaged, because now they're going to recognize, oh, I know Matt doesn't hear that because you're looking at me and not him. So I'm going to take a minute and repeat that to him. Or I know that Matt relies on lip reading a little bit to help him hear better. So let's make sure we get a table that it's under the light at the restaurant. Or maybe in the corner where he can sit with his back to the wall so he's not bothered by background noise. So probably with like just about everything else in life, it's safer to over communicate. And if you have a support structure around you, they're going to adapt to that very quickly. But I would also say don't get your feelings hurt if they forget at times, because we're all in our own head and we're all focused on our own things. Just because someone forgets that you have hearing loss, a spouse or a friend or a kid, doesn't mean they're intentionally trying to leave you out. So seeking out those support groups in your immediate surroundings, if you don't have them, social media, there's pros and cons to any social media, right? But what we're doing right now is wonderful. And it's a great way to get a message out in a very transparent and authentic way. Those exist. So find a group that you're comfortable with and that you can vent to, and maybe they can vent to you. It might take you 2 or 3, because I'm a member of a lot of groups. And after the first week, I was like, oh man, I don't need something online of people telling me what just constantly with their problems. I like something where people can share and other people can offer solutions or tips, and there's a give and take. So it took me a few years, but I found some groups online that I feel I can help with and they can help me. So like I said, if you don't have that group around you, there's someone out there that gets what you're going through. It just might take a little trial and error to find them.
Love it. Love it. So be assertive, don't be passive and expect them to know that you've got this hearing loss, because hearing loss for most of the people is something that's unseen, right? Especially if we do a good job, fitting you and you don't see the devices. You've got your implant, so you do see the processor part on the outside, but you can still forget, right? So that's a great point as well. So don't be passive, don't be aggressive and get upset at them, but be assertive. Over communicate is what I'm hearing. Those are all great tips. So as we're talking to Matt Hay, if you're just joining us as well, we come here every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. at Mountain Standard Time. And Dr. Galloway is out sick today, but she is still tuning in. And we are talking with Matt Hay. We're going to get soon to what he has created, which is amazing. But if you do have questions along the way and you're watching this and you're tuning in, or even afterwards, if you're catching the replay, please don't forget to post a question and we will relay it to Matt and get it answered for you. I mean, because when can you just sit here and talk to somebody who has this type of hearing loss, who is sharing his journey, as well as introducing something that he has actually created as well. So if you do have questions for him down the line, feel free to either ask it now. This is why we do a live show, so that way we can connect to people in real time and get them connected to whatever we're talking about or whoever we're talking with, as well as, maybe even in the replay, go ahead and post your question there if you have something later on. So with that, Trista, what is another question that you might have for Matt?
So just something else that I kind of want to know was just what is the most profound thing you've come to learn through your deafness, and then being able to hear some things better now than what you had before. Maybe you kind of address that, but what's something that's really significant that you've come to notice?
Another great question. And I think this ties into a point that Natalie just made, is never underestimate the value of self-advocacy. Everybody in the world is busy, whether it's like with action or in their head. And so waiting for something to happen, sometimes that works. I have found, and I'm saying this not because from the day it happened, I was a self-advocate. I learned the hard way. I waited for a long time. They said, hey, your hearing over time with your implant could get better. I waited for that to get better. and it never, marginally. I'd get a new map every year and it would get marginally better. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 years, it stopped getting better. And so I just sat back and waited. And self-advocacy doesn't necessarily mean creating a letter writing campaign or going to talk to somebody. Sometimes it can be as simple as sitting down at your computer and Googling what your problem is and seeing what solutions are out there, whether it's some kind of new tech. For me, specific to my hearing, that self-advocacy, I started reading about music therapy and people being able to speak better or hear better through music therapy. There was no data because so few people have ABIs, and because brain learning and brain hearing, was still kind of a new concept. I think it existed among PhDs at a few universities out there, but it wasn't something that hearing care professionals were talking about regularly even 10 years ago. So I started finding that on my own and thought, I've been lazy with my ABI recovery. And everybody said, wow, you can hear pretty well for an ABI recipient, which was not very well. And I got lazy. So I started trying it. I thought, I'm going to start listening to music. And so I put on a CD of greatest hits of songs that I knew very well. And it sounded awful. I didn't get any of it. But in my car each day, I would listen to the same thing over and over again. And after about 12 or 18 months, I started picking up a word here or a phrase there. And I noticed that as I started getting more of these songs, my annual hearing aid mapping, my hint recognition scores, which for any other patients out there is just hint and AZ bio, or two fancy phrases audiologists like to throw around. But it's basically just an objective way to say, how well do you understand things? And those scores started going up. And I thought, how wild that after 10 years with my implant, John, Paul, George, and Ringo have become my hearing aid or my hearing kind of teachers. And so I started seeing very quantitative proof that this was working. And my hearing scores went up. I ended up in about the mid 60s on my hint recognition scores. Well, getting 2/3 of what's said when you're deaf is pretty amazing. I got lazy again. Sometimes I get a little hard-headed. You'd think that would give me motivation to keep trying. But I stopped. I stopped working on getting better because everybody said, wow, this is great for an ABI user. And so I stopped. I thought I got to that next threshold. After a while, and a lot of these things correspond to, okay, well, now I had kids and I want to hear them. Well, now I've started a new job and I want to be able to hear this. So when you kind of find the right motivation, for me, it got me off the couch back, trying to find what the next thing could be to self-advocate and help me hear even better. And by coincidence, Natalie mentioned Angela Alexander. I reached out to her because I had never heard of auditory processing disorder. And so I called her and we just chatted for about what was supposed to be 15 minutes became an hour and 15 minutes. If anybody has talked to Angela, she can very quickly fill an hour and 15 minutes of talking. And we became very quick friends. And she said, let's do this again in 1 week. And 10 weeks and 20 hours later, I found myself a guinea pig of auditory processing disorder training with my implant. And instead of trying to, so I think my evolution was, I'm trying to hear better by just existing in the world. And osmosis is going to help me learn to hear with my ABI. And it did for a little bit. And then music, I was going to focus on music and that's going to help me. And it did a little bit. Well, what Angela does, and specifically with her, and I have only worked with her in APD, so I don't know if this is unique to her approach and Jack Katz's approach or to the industry in general. But she said, instead of trying to use osmosis or one song or even one word, let's break it down into an individual sound. And it was the first time I had heard the word phoneme. And we did a lot of very intensive phoneme training of, I'm not even going to try to teach you the word mom. I just want to help you identify m versus n, which is actually super hard. Mm-hmm. And so from that, my AZ bio scores in the last year with my APD training went from 68 to 96. And to hear 96%, I mean, those same tests that I used to fail all the time, I can listen to, and my audiologist kind of makes fun of me because nobody gets more excited to repeat random sentences like, I think you dropped the fork from the table. And I can hear them. I'm not guessing. I'm not, something about a fork, maybe. I hear them. And I attribute all of that to self-advocacy and finding the things that could help me and finding the Angelas of the world that could help me.
That is so awesome. Wow. Wow. Okay. So I also want to get to what you created as well. And so talk to us a little bit more. I had hinted at the Redux system, and Dr. Galloway did a great video about the Redux system. And she's got a comment here because she's tuning in here. So let's make sure. Yes. She's very amazed at your persistence and motivation, how much you've improved. Yes, absolutely. Totally agree 100%, Dr. Galloway. So glad that you're able to join us as well. And we love having the Redux system in our practice. We've used it pretty much on almost everybody that has come in for their hearing aid checks. We've put our AirPods in there. We have a leaderboard in the back room where we have how much moisture has been taken out. Oh my gosh. And it's pretty funny because one of the people that are on our leaderboard, he is an audiologist and wears hearing aids. And so every time he stops by, he runs back to see where our leaderboard is. So, us audiologists, right? We're so type A. We need to know everything and need to beat everybody at everything. So, so talk to us a little bit more. Where did you get this idea and how did the whole process start in creating the Redux system?
Sure. So I spent 20 years in a particular role, initially in sales and marketing. I probably stayed in it a little bit too long, but when you have bilateral acoustic neuromas, brain tumors, having great insurance is a pretty compelling reason to stay with the job. I got to a point where I was doing a lot of advocacy for hearing care, and I just knew where my heart was. And so I started looking around for ways to get into hearing care. Around that same time, I was skiing in Michigan and lost my implant in the snow, and it died. And, I ran it through the hot air thing that Cochlear gave me. I put it in rice. I knew none of that would work, and it didn't. And my neighbor said, hey, there's a company that dries cell phones called Redux. They're in 2,000 Verizon stores. They are looking to get into audiology. You should go talk to them. I have never met an audiologist I didn't like, and I've never met a hearing aid I couldn't get wet. So I was pretty sure she was wrong because I'd done a lot of research on how to keep hearing aids dry. And it was all just different combinations of really hot air and hours of treatment. And the outcome was always, that it can't hurt. So I went. This company was located 15 minutes from my house. So on the way to drop off my implant at my own ENT practice, I went by and they said, yeah, we can dry that. So to be clear, Redux existed before me. So I didn't invent the technology. I just went and said, can you dry my implant? And 15 minutes later, they took my implant out. And I did not like the way it sounded because it had never been that loud and clear and crisp. I couldn't remember the last time my implant was that loud. I put it back on my head and I could hear the vent of the heater above me. I could hear the door open and close, and I was overwhelmed with sound. And I thought, well, hey, I didn't expect this to be a job opportunity. But Ruben Zielinski, who's the founder and president, was there. And I said, do you do this for hearing aids? And he said, we just got back from the AAA event in Columbus, Ohio 2 weeks ago. And our focus entirely moving forward is how to expand this in to hearing care because we know hearing aids get wet. And I said, are you hiring? And an hour later, I left there as their director of audiology sales. So a lot of serendipity there because this was a solution to something that I actually needed. And the idea of selling something that I would use and I know that could make my life better was very exciting for me, because thinking like a salesperson and a business
Mhm.
person, I thought, well, I can call my ENT practice now, and instead of driving 30 miles, paying to park, paying a copay, it's out of warranty. I would have cost me $250. I would have had to wear my 5-year-old implant for a week until my new one came back. So when I think about the cost, the time, the inconvenience, the inability to hear, and these guys just avoided all of that in 15 minutes. And I think now it's closer to 8 or 9 minutes
Mhm.
by pushing a button while I waited. And I thought, I want to work here. Um, and so that was 3 years ago. I do not recommend offering an in-office medical device just before a global pandemic. So if you're thinking about doing that, I wouldn't. Um, but I take a lot of pride in the fact that our team, from really this year, just looking at 2021, when things kind of opened back up, we added 47 states. So we added Redux to 47 states and 7 countries across 3 continents.
Wow. It's so awesome to hear that because, we had run our AirPods, right? And Dr. Galloway and I looked at each other and we're like, well, what's a microliter? And so we looked that up, and a microliter is equal to a grain of salt, is what we looked up. And then also what we found with, we ran Redux on patients that came in to our open house at our new office. And we ran hearing aids, and we also ran a cochlear implant processor. And the ones that had a lot of moisture that came out, you could really tell the difference when they put it back on. They said, whoa, it's a lot louder, even the processor. And I thought that was really interesting as well. Even the hearing aids that are rechargeable. So you can do this for hearing aids that are non-rechargeable as well as rechargeable. And even with those, people are noticing a difference when they put it back on from that moisture, that, whether it was in the actual hearing aid itself, or maybe more of the part that sits in your ear, right? And so we've noticed a huge difference, and we're both so thankful to have it in our office to be able to offer it to our patients. So thank you for being the sales director, and also just really being advocate for that as well, because we're really enjoying it. All right, go, Trista. Did you have another question for Matt?
Yeah, so with this Redux system, what are your goals for the future with this? Or where do you see this kind of going? I also saw on your webpage that you'd also talked about being a public speaker and advocator for this kind of stuff. Do you also have goals in that area as well?
So this was my very transparent answer. I struggled a little bit in this role personally because I work for Redux, and I want to get Redux out there because I know that it can help. And I would feel guilty when people would ask about my own experience, because um, I felt conflicted of, is it ethical for me to talk about me when I'm an employee and this is a work day, right? Redux is paying me essentially to be on this conversation. And I really felt conflicted with that. And one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for where I am is there's never been a question from anybody within our organization of, is talking about me or talking about Redux, like which of those is how I should be spending my time, because they are genuinely committed to, let's just help people hear better. And it's all going to fall into place. So if me speaking at an event about my own experience helps people to understand, whether it's a patient or a practitioner, what it might feel like to have hearing loss in a way that they didn't know before, that's part of our mission. Whether you buy a dryer or not, that's part of our mission. And so I will always be grateful to them for giving me that opportunity. I also understand that there's a very natural fit. I use this. I came to work for them because they saved me hundreds of dollars. And every 6 months, they save me from having to, I can proactively avoid having my hearing aid, or my implant start to slowly see some degradation and start to slowly lose my S's and T's. So it's a very easy thing for me to position because I use it. I kind of feel like the hair club for men guy sometimes, where he says, not only am I a client, but I bought the company or whatever. I didn't buy the company, but I also want to make sure people understand that it's all genuine. That there's not. I'm not pitching something. That I really believe this can help. And I don't even know, Natalie, if we have talked about this, but the first 2 years, every Redux system that went out was Wi-Fi enabled. And we did that because we wanted an online survey to capture nothing about patients, but we wanted to know pre and post condition. We wanted to know how long it would take. We wanted to know geography and seasonality. And the reason we wanted that was because, if you've already bought the device, we don't need that data to sell you. We wanted that information because there was a huge gap in hearing aid care. I looked hard and there just wasn't any information about moisture data. Audiologists sort of universally agreed that moisture was kind of a problem you had to deal with. And the solution was send it back and get a new one. To me, that was like, well, if I have a problem with my car, instead of changing the oil, I'm going to send it back to Detroit and they're going to send me a new car. Why would we do that if we can very easily proactively avoid those problems? So we felt like having a very data focused approach. And you guys are doctors. Why would you buy anything anecdotally? You live in a world of data, and that's not going to change. So we wanted to have a very data driven approach to this, and that's why we know now, hey, give this a try, because it removes moisture in 98% of every aid treated. The average runtime is 8 minutes and 40 seconds. We see no change in geography and seasonality in that 98% number. So we're taking moisture out in Fort Collins in January. It's not Florida in August. But that was the belief for a long time. And we finally had, to circle this back to your question, we took all of that data. We ended up we got to, this sounds crazy, but we hit 1 million data points. And you're like, okay, if somebody doesn't believe our outcomes after 1 million data points, I don't think it matters how many millions we have. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of time and effort and expense on our part to gather that data. So we moved forward in talking about goals in September. And this is probably what you guys have. Mm-hmm. We had an 8.5 by 11 unit that weighed about 5 pounds. And this version is smaller. It does the exact same thing. The technology is identical. The outcomes are identical. And that is, it removes all moisture. It won't stop till the moisture's gone. It reports it. It operates at a safe temperature. All of that's the same. We were just able to, by getting rid of some of the requirements for that Wi-Fi enablement, we were able to make it a little bit smaller. Instead of requiring a separate piece of software, it's all on the screen. Some people prefer the separate software. Some people prefer on screen. We're just trying to adapt to the different needs that we hear from audiologists. We're constantly doing what we can to make it a little more accurate, to make it faster. I think if somebody tried Redux 2 years ago, they've probably gotten half a dozen different firmware updates, because every time we can drop the dry time by 30 seconds because our algorithm improves, we would push out a new firmware update. So this version, like I said, averages 8 minutes and 40 seconds. When I started, we were running 20, 25, 30 minutes. Wow. So we have an entire engineering team who's always focused on that. We are at a point now where a big focus is just awareness. I'm also very pragmatic, and I understand that there have been a lot of brands that come and go. I had a story from an audiologist in Fort Collins who has since retired, but he said when he sold his practice, his basement was filled with the next big thing. His basement of his practice is just filled with things that were going to be game changers. We understand that we have to overcome some of that. And we don't want to be, and we don't believe we are the next big thing. The this would be a best practice of let's make sure we get the moisture out before we do a real ear measurement or before we diagnose X, Y, and Z. Let's make sure we're treating a dry aid. So the awareness standpoint is how do we continue to gain credibility so that people understand this isn't the next best thing? And that's why we take the risk of a free shipping, and you got a 30-day trial. And if you don't, and we'll train you. And if you don't like it, we'll take it back. And I'm also in the spirit of transparency. I'm not ashamed at all to say, I think the first one that we sent maybe one or two to Natalie. And when she received it, it wasn't working the way that we wanted it to. And I hope she can attest that it was 24 hours later, you had a new one.
Oh, yeah.
We're not perfect, but we do take a lot of pride in the service, in the product that we offer and the service that we provide. And 24 hours later, she had something new. I don't like for anybody to wait for customer service, but I see a lot of audiology group questions about how long hold times are to talk to manufacturers. And so I take a lot of pride in the fact that I think if anybody has a question for me, if you don't hear back in an hour, you're certainly going to hear back within the day. We just know when you launch a new brand and a new product and really an entirely new category, which is proven moisture, professional moisture removal, it takes a while for this industry to accept that that is a real solution that they need. So that'll be a big focus of me, my time in 2022.
Awesome. I think the biggest thing, that I heard too is awareness. So if you're watching this and you haven't heard about Redux, or if you've loved Matt's story, and his journey, share this out. We've been getting comments from people that are watching on Facebook, from somebody who's watching on LinkedIn right now. And so it's been pretty amazing, Matt. And I think another thing that I've learned just listening to you as well is the takeaway that I have from this last point that you talked about your journey and about kind of deciding between, do I take it the patient way, or do I also take it while I'm representing this company, is the biggest thing that I've learned in my life as well is to be an and not an or. So what that means is you're not just this, you're not just a person that has this type of hearing loss, or you're not just a person that works for this company, or you're not just an audiologist, and you're not just, I wear this white coat or whatever it is, or I'm not just a business owner, right? It's not something or something, but it's who you are combined together to make what you're bringing out into this world. And I'm sure Redux and anywhere else that you put your energy towards, that you're going to take that. And I just would encourage people to be an and to be this and something else, because combined together, that's what's going to come out, right? And so I loved your message about that, because I totally agree with that. And again, back to best practices. If you're not using Redux, if you're not using something like this, it's exactly what Matt said. Some of the points that he had talked about. Let's make sure we're testing a hearing aid. We're listening to a hearing aid when it walks in that door. That's going to be dry, right? And the biggest thing that I've seen, and the reason why we've decided to do this at our practice, is because it's that wait time, that turnaround time, when someone is not with their hearing aids. Yes, you can give them loaners and you can give them something if you've got that, but without having it for a week and a half or 2 weeks, or, oh, you're going on a trip, so why don't you do that when you come back, or whatever it is. It's really, if you have the chance to not have to send it in, because all it is moisture. And I do remember talking to you, Matt, when I met you at the, I think it was Odd Boss that I met you at. And I thought, okay, but Colorado, I mean, we're pretty dry here, so I'm not really too sure if we're going to need this. And sure enough, it's already helped our patients. And so I just wanted to take some time to thank you for being here, and thank you for giving us your time. It was a great episode, I think. Trista, did you have anything else before we kind of close up?
I just I just wanted to say thank you guys for trusting me here, because I know your as you grow your business, there are a lot of different people and different organizations and different products that you can feature. So I'm genuinely honored that you even thought of me, and we've just loved working with you guys.
Oh, thank you. And one last thing, Matt, if people want to reach out to you, I'll go back and I'll post that website that you gave us, but why don't you give people a way to contact you for more information, whether it's not just about Redux, but he's a keynote speaker, you guys. And so if you heard his journey and how he's combining what he's going through to be able to be impactful for others, reach out to him. He's got, I think it's hearmatthay.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, so any number of ways. I mean, I was told I need to stop giving my cell phone to everybody because
Yeah, don't do that.
but you can reach me at matt@redux.com. You can visit redux.com and there's a trial form. You fill it out and we'll reply back with everything that you need to know within the day.
Awesome.
Here, matthay.com, as you mentioned, certainly an option. And whether your questions are about me or advocacy or Redux or all of the above, any one of those, I can get back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And I'm just going to post this up here so it stays in our show here and in the recording, how to get in touch with you further to make sure. And again, whether you have any questions or not, you can contact Matt further there off of hearmatthay.com. So thank you so much for joining us. All right. So we will be back here again next week. Thank you again, Matt, so much. Thank you, Trista, for joining in as well. And we'll be back here next week at 12:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for a whole new episode of All Things Odd. And thanks so much for joining in, you guys. All right, we'll see you later.
Thanks, guys.